Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis, and I'm your host. It's still Financial Literacy Month, so we want to talk about becoming your own boss. A lot of my clients send me questions about becoming an entrepreneur or still being a W-2 employee, but maybe having a side hustle. So I have someone here that has a lot of experience in launching lots of businesses and also helping others do the same and consulting with them as well. So his name is John. He's the founder of Blueleaf, which some of my clients use. We're going to get into it as far as like exactly what the portal is. Basically, it's an all-in-one wealth management platform that handles reporting, billing, rebalancing, and practice management while helping advisors connect with their clients. He also hosts a podcast of his own, the Augmented Advisor. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff he's learned from the entrepreneurs that he also interviews in that podcast as well. So without further ado, welcome, John.
Hey, so glad to be here, man. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Thank you so much for taking the time, man. I am a user of your product, Blueleaf, which is a beautiful interface, for my clients that are listening, when you get that weekly email with your balance and all that stuff, that is John's company, Blueleaf. So
Thank you.
Give me just a little background of how you ended up in finance in the first place and then ultimately launching this business.
Oh, man. How long you got?
We're here all day, man.
It's a long wandering path, man. Long wandering path. Yeah, I just kind of follow my muse and got lucky along the way. But if finance, pretty early. So I probably started dealing with finance in high school. I read this stupid old book called How to Buy Stocks. And I grabbed some of my college fund and I invested it. And it worked, which might be the worst possible thing that can happen. And was sort of hooked on finance and investing from that point forward. Helped me pay my way into college. And it didn't get me all the way through college, but got me a lot of the way. And sort of been in and out of finance and financial services for a good chunk of my career.
Wow, that's amazing. And did you take the money out of your college fund or you bought the stocks within the college fund itself?
So this is before there was such a thing as a 529 plan.
Really?
Yeah,
you're dating yourself now, John.
Yeah. I'm old as dirt, man.
You certainly don't look it.
Yeah, well, I made that deal with the devil, But there was a bank account, and I asked my parents' permission, and they're like, "Yeah, it's your money," and it worked out. So it was all good.
Wow. How did you build I would say the courage to do that, man? Because I would imagine, you were 17, 18?
Yeah, I was 17. Yeah.
Wow. Like I would not have known even where to start. I mean, even reading the book, I don't think. So.
Yeah. Maybe some of that's maybe wiring. I've got an unreasonable confidence in myself. And believe me, back then it wasn't warranted. It was, I always figured that I could always make it up. And not like I could trade like gambling and I'll just double down and it'll be happy. But I always thought about risk differently. And, the way, and maybe this is what led me to be an entrepreneur, or maybe my inner entrepreneur was always there. But every time I saw any kind of risky situation, and I grew up in the inner city, so am I going to get into a fight like risky situation, or risky situation like this, or when I founded my first business, and I actually convinced those same parents to let me mortgage their house to do it. Yep, nuts, I know. But I always looked at the situation with the same set of questions and said, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? Let's start there. And let's look at that in a lot of detail. Really look at it. How bad is it really? And more often than not, it's not as bad as you think. And more often than not, there are a bunch of ways that you can handle that where it won't break you. There are ways that you can mitigate that risk, so it's less likely to happen. And even if it does, the outcome's not as bad. So I always thought about it in those terms. So risk was always to me a thing to be managed and kind of manipulated and controlled, as opposed to a thing that just was.
Gotcha. That's a great point too. And also, I like the way you frame it because it's also not something that's necessarily to be avoided altogether. Although
Right.
sometimes obviously it's warranted, but it sounds like you had this funnel. You were looking at opportunities right through and saying, okay, what is the worst that could happen, and then go through all the details of that and how can I mitigate that and manage it. Right.
Exactly, and that was my whole sort of my whole life, and it definitely wasn't my parents. I mean, my parents were pretty, conservative, although they were pretty liberal with me in terms of letting me do stuff. But yeah, it was just that was just the way I was wired. I just looked at the world that way, and I think there are a lot of people who look at the world that way. Maybe not necessarily the same tools that I was lucky enough to develop, but they could develop those same tools as well. And when you start to look at the world that way, it's not as scary. It becomes more exciting and interesting, and you worry less about the bad things that can happen because you sort of dealt with them up front, and you think more about the opportunity and what can you do and what really interesting things could you experience.
Yeah. Then you get excited about the positive side, right?
Exactly.
That's impressive though, because I feel like, a lot of people get somewhat paralyzed, I think, when it comes to making certain decisions, because it's a lot easier sometimes to stick with what you know, right? As opposed to
Always.
like, oh, let me just take this leap of faith. I have no idea what's on the other side of this.
Right. And so maybe the best thing you can do is let your imagination go, right? It's some of this is just imagining what can happen and thinking all the different things, um and yeah, the paralysis is real. Like, the people really feel risk, and they get really frightened. And in my experience, that's because risk is this just big scary monster in the closet, as opposed to something that you've walked up to, shook its hand, introduced yourself eye to eye, and you get to know. And once you do that, risks mostly are much less scary.
Yeah, I like that. So, what was that conversation like with your parents? Was there some sort of negotiation? Like, did you have to present a business plan, like that you had it well thought out, or was it more like, "Hey, we trust you. Here's the money." Like, what
Yeah,
was that like?
I mean, it took place over a few months, as you might imagine. And to be clear, my parents were working people. My dad was a jailer, and became deputy sheriff in Boston. My mom was a telephone operator. Neither had ever gone to college, so we were just regular folks. And I wrote up a business plan because I thought that's what you did. And I thought through everything, and I just shared what I was thinking along the way. And then this issue popped up. Oh, I have to come up with $50,000. I don't have that, and I got this idea, and I just asked, and I had involved them in what I was thinking the whole way. And they said, we'll talk about it. And they said yes.
Wow, that's amazing. So tell me about how Blueleaf came about. Like, did you always have like an interest in technology itself and finance and how it all works together, or is that something that you just like stumbled upon?
Always. So along with that sort of ingrained interest in finance was definitely computers and technology. So right around that same time, actually a little before it, I got my first computer. I worked and worked and worked my tail off to save up enough money to buy it. This is back in the day when Apple was selling a computer called the Apple IIe. Macintosh didn't exist. Learned to program in BASIC. And the way that I convinced my parents to kick in a little bit of money for that was I worked all summer at my high school and helped run the computer at my high school. And, so they figured I was serious about it. And so from there, from the jump, I was interested. And, eventually my degree was in economics and computer
Me too.
science. So it was the combination. So I've always been interested in technology, particularly software. I think software governs the way our whole world works, right? All of the electronic stuff, anything you touch that's electronic is run by software.
Yeah.
So I thought that was fascinating. That was a basic literacy in my home, raising my kids. So my kids all know how to program because I thought it was so important for them to know how the world works. And yeah, so very deep interest.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's awesome. So were you at the time employed by someone else when you decided to go on your own?
Let's see. So the which time that I went on my own? So the answer is almost invariably yes. I had some job, and then I moved from that job to doing something on my own. If we're talking about the original business that I borrowed money from my parents, yes, I was selling computers for a living is what I was doing. I was selling, computers retail and to businesses, and kind of pivoted into this. Now, at that point in time, I didn't have, much to worry about. I had an apartment, but I was also paying for, some school to finish up, and that was it. No wife, no kids at that point. But that's what I did. And later in my life, actually, when I started Blueleaf, I was coming from a big job, and had wife, had kids, had a mortgage.
Yeah, different ball games.
Totally different ball game. And there again, though, same issue with the risk. I thought about it, looked it dead in the eye, and figured, okay, what's the worst that can happen? And obviously, the person I brought along in that conversation was my wife, and we talked a lot about it, and over a series of months, and we decided it was the right thing for both of us. The deal was, I figured out how to actually create a side hustle that would pay the bills. So I did some consulting while I was originally starting Blueleaf, and the first 3 years of Blueleaf, I didn't take a salary from the company at all, but I paid for my living from my consulting. So I've always kind of worked two jobs at once, I guess. But I'm sure that's like a lot of folks.
That's very smart. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I know that's probably why a lot of people hesitate, because if they're already in that situation where they have a family, a mortgage, and it's like, wow, it's scary to leave that secure thing. Yeah, I've been through that as well. When I launched my RIA, my RIA was the side hustle in a sense, because I was working a full-time job somewhere else to kind of just pay the bills, right? And then I did all kinds of side hustles, from tax preparation, all kinds of stuff, contract financial planning, and so on, till eventually get my business to that point where I can pay myself a salary and replace the other source of income. But you're at that point sometimes where you're just juggling like 3-4 things at a time.
Yeah. And, so you did the exact same thing, right? If you think about the risk and the way that you mitigated it, you dealt with that risk by putting together other side hustles. Basically, people talk about a portfolio career. You see that on social media sometimes. So you basically build this little portfolio of a few different ways you make money, and you put it all together until the thing that you want to really focus on really hits and takes off, and it allows you to do that. And it's not easy, but that's the way you make that transition, where you don't bet everything, an all or nothing bet, right? Which businesses do fail. And so you got to think about that. But if you do this approach like you did, okay, the worst thing that could happen is the main business you were trying to get to, that wouldn't have worked, but you had all this other stuff going. Something else probably would have come out of that, and you would have found some other business.
Yeah, and I did think about the worst case scenario, and I was like, with my designations, the experience, the years, and stuff, like, I am confident that I could get a job somewhere at an RIA, like servicing a book of business, whatever it was, right? Like, so I'm like, worst case, this just doesn't work. And, there was some strategy behind it, right? Having some savings, some side hustle, getting on my wife's health insurance, things like that. So like you said, it's not putting all my eggs in the one basket. So that was a way of mitigating that risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's one way of looking at it.
You're an entrepreneur, right? That's it. That's it right there. And I think you can do that in almost any environment. Before we kicked the show off, you and I were talking, and I told you about this post that I wrote this week on social media. And excuse me.
I would love a link for that, by the way. We can put it in the show notes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can shoot that to you.
Thank you.
But the post was really about this idea that you can be an entrepreneur, whether you work for yourself or you work for somebody else. The big difference between being an employee and a manager and an entrepreneur is really this. If I'm a manager working for somebody else, for an employee working for somebody else, I start with the idea of, okay, what resources do I have? What does the company give me? What do I have here? And how do I use those to solve this problem that's in front of me, that, the whatever service I need to deliver, how do I take those resources and do that? The difference with an entrepreneur is they start with, okay, what problem do I want to solve? What's the thing I'm interested in solving and fixing and making better in the world? And then you ask the question, okay, what resources do I need to solve that problem? What money, what assets, what partnerships, what people, whatever it is. And then you move heaven and earth to go solve that and get those resources that you need. You borrow them, you beg, you do whatever you need to do, but you get those resources in place to go solve that problem. And that's being an entrepreneur. But you can do that inside of a company. And I have. And it rocks some boats. But the performance can be awesome. And your view of the world changes quite substantially when you kind of free those mental constraints and you start to really just think bigger.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, because, for those that are not ready to take that leap yet, they could still do it within their own firms. And who knows what that may lead to, right? Whether promotion, maybe even partnership or something, right?
Yeah. Or it could lead to them getting fired.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't mean to be, funny, even though it is kind of funny to think about, but it can, because it does rock the boat. People are used to having folks fit into a box, and it makes people feel real comfortable. I remember one of my jobs was as an investment banker. So, fancy words for I bought and sold companies for people. And I remember I was a young investment banker. Level was called associate. So basically you're starting there after business school, which I went to. And I was older than most folks. I had more experience. I had started companies, sold them, this kind of thing before. And associates are just supposed to do the work. But I literally showed up and brought business in with me. I'm like, so this guy wants to sell his company. How do we do that? And no one knew what to do with me because associates don't do this. How do we deal with this? Well, it's a fee, right? So you want that fee? Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's take the guy in here. Let's sell his company. And so my job was different from day one because I just showed up with business and I was generating business. And, then the guys who are more senior there sort of figured out, oh, the kid can sell and the people like this guy to do this kind of work. Let's just bring him along. And so I just had a different role because I just behaved differently.
Yeah, you created a whole new role.
I could just as easily have been fired for that.
That's true.
So that's that same risk. Okay, what's the risk? And I realized, okay, I could get fired, but I don't care. That's fine. I'll go find another job.
Yeah. That's fascinating. What is a good way of testing an idea? I know, like leveraging today's world, right? Technology, social media, and so on. That you had mentioned when we first spoke about just, you had given me an example of someone you knew that wanted to open a restaurant and went the route of like renting a food truck or something like that. So, it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So I've been into this idea, something called a lean startup for a long time. Last decade or so, really, since the concept came out. The idea is really just how do you apply the scientific method to creating a business or a company? And not just Field of Dreams. And I realize I'm dating myself with that movie reference too. But that is build it and they will come, right? The idea that I'm just going to build something and then I know it's so good that people are going to show up and buy it. Please, folks, don't ever do that. That's a bad idea. What you want to do is find a way to test it. And you want to find a way to test it cheaply and quickly. And the better you do that, the faster you do that, the more frequently you go through that process of build, test, learn, the quicker you'll get to an answer where you've got a real business, a real offer for people that they want to buy. And so any business idea you can come up with a cheap way to test it. One way that people do it on the internet is, they'll do some social media stuff, or they'll do a little bit of advertising, cheap money, and they'll put up a landing page. This is this thing, you go to a link on the internet, you land there, and you fill out a form to get access to something, or get on a waiting list, or get on a newsletter, or whatever. Many of those folks are just testing the concept, this business idea, and by you expressing interest, they're learning that that's valid. If nobody shows up and does that, they realize that, okay, this is a bad idea. So in the case you were talking about that we chatted about before we got on air, there was a guy that came to me, and this is right when I was starting Blueleaf, and was looking for some advice about how to start it. And I was in this lean startup movement, and we talked about it. And he was talking about building this big restaurant. It's about $2 million to build out the restaurant. And what we realized was he could test out the cuisine ideas. He could test out the menu ideas. He could test out all these things about it by grabbing a food truck. And so, okay, $2 million down to, I don't know, $50,000 or whatever it would have been to buy a food truck. And then we thought, well, why do you have to own the food truck? Is there a way to rent one? And then we found that, and we figured out how to do that in his area. And he rented the food truck, and not riskless, but for a few $1,000s instead of a few million, he was able to test this idea and realized both that it worked and realized he hated it. So he didn't do it, but he was able to figure all that out without putting all that money, time, and energy at risk. And this idea of speed, of learning, is really important in entrepreneurship. The one thing that none of us can make more of is time. That I think is kind of the key when you're thinking about being an entrepreneur. How do I learn really fast whether this is going to work or not? Find ways to do that fast and inexpensive, and kind of go through that and, okay, I learned something, I tweak it, I change something, let me try it again, let me see what I learned. And you go through that process over and over again. And often you can go through that enough that you learn something that really works and it's going to be great. And then sometimes you learn that it doesn't work, and that's okay. Then you can move on to something else.
Yeah, definitely time is a finite resource. Something you said caught my attention, because not only is it to find out if it works, but also if you like it, right? That was very key. That really stood out to me, because you're right. Like, you could have an idea that's really good, and then you're like, oh, I really hate this.
Yeah.
So you don't want to spend, in that case, $2 million, outfit this whole restaurant, and then it's like, oh my God, I hate this.
And commit a decade to something that makes you miserable. Yeah, that's problematic, right? So that's the other thing you want to be able to test, is whether or not this is for me. And you better love it, because becoming an entrepreneur to get rich is fool's gold. Most entrepreneurs don't get rich except in the level of control over their life and how they can manage their time and energy. And I think that's worth a lot. So you gotta want to do it. You gotta love it, because that's what'll carry you through the tough times, and there will be tough times.
Absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of those tough times, are there any ones that stand out to you through your journey, either your own or some of the people you've interviewed? Just kind of how they were dealt with, because like you said, like sometimes they'll come, right? And if you're not in it for the long haul, you don't love this, you're likely gonna not succeed then.
Yeah. So in the very early days of my current company, Blueleaf, we had raised money So we went out and we pulled in money from investors and the like. And, you don't always need to do that when you start a business, but it was what we did. And we were running out of money, but didn't have enough revenue coming in to pay everyone. And eventually got to the point where, I had to let everybody know and tell them that this was a risk and, what was going on. And this is very, very, very early days. It was, right when we were just starting to get our first few customers. And we couldn't pull in any additional money. So the market had kind of frozen up and nobody was making investments. And it got to the point where there were just two of us.
Wow.
Down from 8, I think, when we first started. And the two of us just dug it out, built some more stuff, sold some more stuff, built some more stuff, sold some more stuff, and eventually had enough money to hire another person. And then built some more stuff, sold some more stuff, hired another person, so on and so forth. And just drowned it out from that point. But if we weren't committed to it, we were dead in the water at that point.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things, those kinds of, near-death experiences for companies happen all the time. Sometimes they survive, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's dependent on the commitment of the people. Sometimes there's nothing those folks can do.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to know that because sometimes I've experiences where year over year, my gross income goes up, but then you have to reinvest back into the business. Like when I first started, I was doing my own bookkeeping and my own marketing and just everything. I wore every single hat, right? So, but as my business grew, then I was able to say, hey, I can hire a compliance consultant. I can hire a bookkeeper and I can hire an assistant, right? But I'm not making any more money. Like you mentioned, you didn't take a salary for like 3 years, and that could be a frustration too, because you're like, wow, I'm really working really hard. Years are passing. I'm not necessarily like seeing the benefit yet, right?
Yeah. It's a big challenge, right? And the first big hurdle you clear as an entrepreneur is you go from nothing to something, 0 to 1. And you start to have a business where there are customers, you're making money. You may not be making a salary, but the business is making some money. And you have a business. Might be more of a hobby, but you've got something that looks like a business. And then it starts to grow and you start to do better and better. And you grind and you grind and grind. And then you're getting really busy if things are going well. And really busy, and you're doing everything like you were saying. And you're playing every role. And then you think, okay, I need help. And then you think, I've got to hire someone. And you look and you're like, well, wait a minute, I got to pay that person more than I'm making in order to bring them on. And then you think, oh, there's got to be a different way. So different businesses solve that problem differently. The way that we solved it was a lot of part-time and contract roles and part-time positions and outsource people, but we would get really tight with those people. So they felt like family. They felt like
team, right?
Part of the team. And even if they were only working a few hours a week for us, we really fostered that. And then eventually many of those roles got taken over, obviously, by full-time people. But that was how we grew when we couldn't grow by hiring this person, then that person, then the other person. That's how you bridge that gap.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think that when you're building a business, should you have in mind the concept of something I read in a book of eventually having the business operate without you, in a sense, so that you're because it was kind of like the difference between being self-employed and an entrepreneur, where like the concept was if you can't go away for like a month, and if you go away for a month and the business goes under, like you need to be able to somehow separate it where there's something there. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really smart way to think, just not at the beginning. Excuse me. So at the beginning, you just got to get it to work, right? That's your first. So it's a series of survival objectives, right? You fail, you don't survive. So survive first. And then once you have the business and it's stable where it's dependent on you, then you think systems. Okay, how do I make this business so that it isn't dependent on me day in, day out, day in, day out for everything that we do? And eventually you wean yourself off of that. But most founders find that for some aspects of the business is dependent on them for that particular thing for a very, very, very long time. And so in Blueleaf's case, I'm not only the founder and the CEO, I'm also the CPO, the Chief Product Officer, because product is kind of where I'm at, right? If you think about, I was talking about finance and talking about computer science and all of that. The other part I didn't talk much about was the marketing and the understanding of markets. You put all that together and you get to product. How do I create product that makes people happy? And that's where all the innovation is. And usually real innovation winds up only coming from the founder. Usually.
Yeah.
So you're not gonna break yourself away from that. But, in your case, if somebody comes in and they need a simple financial plan and you want to be on vacation, you would really like to be able to have a paraplanner that can help you do that so that they get serviced. Or somebody needs to take cash out of an account. Well, that shouldn't necessarily be a call to you. All of these other processes that are day to day, just how the machine runs, you want to be out of those as soon as you can reliably be out of those, right? Well, as the business gets to that scale where it's big enough that you can afford those little bits of help, you start to think about systems where you don't need to be part of them.
Yeah, then you can focus on that one thing, right? That
exactly
started the business in the first place. I like the concept of thinking about the problem to solve and then testing it out, because sometimes we may have an idea that it's not really solving what we think it is. I've been part of I once took a course where the course wasn't really built, and it was, they were upfront about it. Like, hey, I want you guys to be basically like the guinea pigs for this, right? And it's like, here's what I have in mind. Does this resonate? Is there anything you want to hear about, right? And then it gets built eventually, but it's a pretty cool strategy. Like, so you get you can offer people a discount or something for them to be part of the first round of something, right?
Exactly. And there's a really good book by a very interesting cat named Alex Hormozy, so he's got a book called $100 Million Offers. An offer in this case is just kind of a package of product, service, pricing, that kind of thing. What do you offer to the marketplace? And he's got a great version of these kinds of processes where you start with an idea and a group of people that you're trying to help with that idea. And they basically collaborate with you to find a solution that works for them and that they'd be willing to pay for, and so on and so forth. And those are some of the best ways to get going in an entrepreneurial venture, right? Because you're testing it not in the shower in your mind. You're testing it with real humans who have to part with real money to get that solution. And that is the only test that matters. Will someone pay you for what you're offering?
Yeah.
If the answer is no, then you got to change your offer or change the someone that you're offering it to.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. For sure. So, I know you've mentioned a lot of it. So if you had to summarize it, let's say, someone that doesn't have access to your content, your podcast, anything, and they met you in an elevator, and you're going to be with them for a short ride, and they just say, hey, what are, 2 to 3 things that you would say, I'm trying to start a business, I have an idea or a passion. Where should I begin?
I'd begin by talking to the people you're trying to help, right? The first thing. Some people think about it as audience, in social media context, but think about gathering up as many of those people as you can, learn about their problem, talk to them. Don't lead the witness. Don't tell them your solution before they tell you about what they care about. Just listen to them. So that's the first thing that I would do, and really deeply learn about what it is that they care about. what language do they use to describe it? How painful is it? How much is it worth to them? What have you? So that'd be where I start. And then the second thing I'd say is test it, right? So now you've learned this problem deeply. You've got some solution in mind. You've probably changed that after you talk to them for a bunch. Then test it. Find an inexpensive way to test it quickly. And then for every test, it means you get feedback on why that didn't solve the problem that you think you defined. And you make a change and you go back and you test some more and you keep going. Eventually you get a business out of that. Almost certainly.
Nice.
That's what I tell them.
I love that. Yeah. What are some good forums you think now? Is it more like a Zoom call, like a weekly Zoom call with these people, or a Facebook group, a Slack group or something, just to kind of like gather as many people as you can that are interested so that you learn more about the problem and how to solve it?
Yeah. So if you're listening to this, the way I'd answer that is whatever you're good at, right? So lean into you and whatever you're good at. So you're all over Facebook and you get 1 billion Facebook friends, Facebook group, great. Bam, you're there. Gotcha. You're all over LinkedIn and, you've got a tribe on LinkedIn who has this problem, go there. If, you're amazing at standing on a sidewalk and getting any stranger to talk to you, man, do that. Like anything that you are good at in terms of connecting with other human beings, start there.
Gotcha. That's smart. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You don't have to be on, 4 different social media channels.
No, do you, right? You, and in almost every business, what you learn eventually is that you are the only differentiator. You're the only thing that makes it different than the 127,000 other businesses that are trying to offer exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's very true. Absolutely. That's sound, man. I love this, man. Thank you so much.
I love this.
Yeah, this is awesome. Wanted to ask you one more thing. I know you've sold some companies, right? And like started new ones. Obviously, this is way down the line, but do you find that, because I feel like there's a lot of people that are, I guess they're called serial entrepreneurs, right? Like they're successful, they sell a company. Maybe it's like tattoos, like people just don't get one, what's that transition like? Is it like you just found another passion, or is it more like, okay, I sold the company, I have money, but like I still feel like I can make a change,
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's different for everybody and different at every stage in your journey. I know some entrepreneurs I've spoken with, they get another idea, every 10 minutes. And one of them will just grab hold of them and they're like, I got to sell this thing so I can go do that thing. Others, that the idea they're working on fails and then they start over. And some, it takes a long time between gigs. I'm in a group with a guy that sold a business for a lot of money in 2018, like $40 million. Went into depression. It was like, where'd my life go? Like, I used to get up and I had purpose 24/7. I was all excited, and that's gone. And he had to sort of rediscover himself. Because sometimes as an entrepreneur, you get so wrapped up with your business, like that is who you are.
It becomes your identity.
Yeah. And so I think it's a little bit different journey for everyone.
Yeah. But, it goes to show how important it is for it to be something that you're passionate about. Because you had mentioned, there'll be tough times, but even when there are good times, like a big sale, right? $40 million in this case, you might still be unhappy because now you wrapped up your identity in what you used to.
What do I do tomorrow morning? That kind of thing. I think a lot of the things that we learn as entrepreneurs, it's similar to what we all learn as humans, but know thyself, right? Everything sort of flows from your ability to really understand yourself, what you're good at, what you're not, what you love, what you don't, how you react in situations. How do you shape those reactions so that you're not led by them, but you control them? Yeah, so much of it is just learning yourself.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of deep soul searching in that whole process of entrepreneurship.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
yeah, I'm sure I have certainly questioned my path several times.
Yeah. Yeah. And my wife has too. It is like that. But maybe every worthwhile journey is like that. Every journey with real challenges and difficulties, you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, what am I doing? Is this worth it?
Yeah,
Those are healthy questions. That isn't depression. That's a healthy self-reflection, right?
yeah,
And I feel like every time I've asked that question, I've said, well, here's why I'm doing it. And this is why I get back up the next day and I go do that and I get right back at it.
yeah.
And recently, it's been interesting when I've had a tough day. My response is the next day I'll call one of my customers, hey, Ty, just want to catch up. And then I get to hear about all the ways we've made his life and his business better. You and I were talking, when we started, you're like, oh, I love your stuff. And here's why. Sometimes you just get motivation from the people you serve. And that is awesome. It's so amazing.
That is such a great point. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I do get like rejuiced, when I have conversations. I usually like call my clients on their birthday or something, and sometimes you just have those calls. Even if you're having a bad day, and then you just get to hear from someone else, and it just happens to bring up how you have helped them and all that, and yeah, it just rejuvenates you, man, and it shows you this is why we're doing this, right?
Right. And it reminds you of your purpose.
Yeah.
And then everything comes from that, right? When you're lined up doing work in the world that aligns with your purpose, you'll keep going. Not every day is going to be joyous. Not every day is going to be thrilling and happy and whatever, but it's satisfying. It's aligned with who you are. And I can't ask for more than that.
Yeah, you can't put a price in that. You're so right about that. When you were saying that earlier, I was thinking about myself. Like right now, I would struggle if I had to go work for someone else 9 to 5, 8 to 4, in my case, because I've been on my own for quite a bit now, probably about 8 years in total. And yeah, there is some part of that where it's like, hey, if I don't want to work this particular Friday, I'm going to take it off, spend some time with my wife. There's a lot of flexibility there you can't put a price on. I work virtual. I can move around the country, which I have done several times. Obviously those aren't quantifiable things, but there's a lot to be said just for that freedom, in a sense. But there's also the other side to it, right? Where like I don't work just 5 days. Some days, Saturdays is like another day for me to work, and late nights and whatever. So depending on the season that I'm going through in my business, right?
Absolutely. And I think this is where work-life balance is a head fake. Because particularly as an entrepreneur, there is no such thing. But what I have found, and we were talking about this earlier, is there is such a thing as work-life integration, especially when you're lined up and you're doing work that is aligned with who you are, your purpose.
Yeah.
And then when you're doing some work on a Saturday, you don't resent it. And neither does your family, because that's just who dad is or who mom is. But also then that Monday night baseball game you get to go to, right? They're like, yep, that's who dad is too.
Yeah.
That's who mom is too. So I'd rather have integration where I get all the responsibility of making all this work, but all the freedom that goes with that.
Yeah. Man, that's a mic drop moment right there. Thank you so much. That is amazing. Where can we find you? I'm going to put the link to the post that you recently did and the book from Alex Hormozi. Where can we find you online, social media? I'll put links to those as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, my best is LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every day. Publish content 5 days a week on LinkedIn. So that is your best bet, and I'll give you the link for the show notes. But yeah, that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
All right, awesome. Well, appreciate you taking the time, and this was a lot of fun, very insightful. So thank you so much for taking the time to being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. As always, if you have any questions, send me an email, luis@onmywaytowealth.com. Leave a comment, like, and most importantly, share. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.